Hello. So I'm going to read chapter 2 of Singularity now. And one of the people I read it to suggested that it might make a better chapter 1 than chapter 1 does. So I might very well switch them around. But let me know what you think if anyone actually watches this video. And also, if you like this chapter, subscribe for some more. Great. So, Singularity Chapter 2, or 1, as the case may be. Gabe Matherson heard about the Excalibur Challenge from his only friend at the University of Washington. Apparently, almost every student at the school had been working on it for weeks, and so when it reached Gabe, the information was in the form of a question which presupposed that he was, too. How goes Excalibur? Donovan, you're doing it again, Gabe feigned concern. Doing what? Being intentionally inscrutable. We talked about this. Donovan was the sort of person who, when he didn't know what to say, would take a swing for the bizarro fences, like, if I could have any superpower, I'd be able to mind control squirrels. He never followed these declaratives up with an explanation or a question, so all they did was make him seem insane, or so Gabe had claimed in a recent conversation in which they had tried to diagnose each other's social failings. Donovan, for his part, claimed that his outbursts were a way of testing prospective conversations before engaging. If the other party was willing to come up with a contending idea before judging him for thinking about something like mind-controlled squirrel slaves, then they knew then they were probably worth talking to. It was a smooth explanation, but Gabe knew it was a rationalization rather than a reason. In truth, Donovan acted out of nervousness. He panicked in social situations, worried that people would think him weird, because they so often did, and decided to act his weirdest, so that only those willing to accept him at his worst would talk to him at all. It was a classic defense mechanism, so typical it made Gabe ill. It was a good thing Donovan had such an extraordinary mind, or Gabe would have ignored him completely. That was Gabe's social issue: arrogance. He refused to speak to most people, because he invariably found them insufferably predictable. He thought of his classmates as a homogeneous mass of timber floating down the inexorable river of college towards the waterfall of degree, where they would tumble haphazardly into whatever career they landed in and let its mill shape them into a perfectly symmetrical, perfectly boring plank. Gabe felt proud of his self-knowledge and his willingness to call his arrogance by its proper name, rather than inventing some convoluted rationale as Donovan did. He had cognizantly decided that he was better than his peers, and so didn't fill his life with them. There was a certain integrity in making the choice deliberately. It did mean that he missed out on things, though, like the Excalibur challenge, which Donovan was explaining to him. It's a challenge set by General Dynamics' Cybersecurity Division. If you can hack their network and find certain data, then you get a reward. There are 7 targets, getting harder as you go. The last level is Excalibur, which is some kind of experimental program they're running. Hack that, and they say they might give you a job. Gabe was intrigued. General Dynamics was a huge organization, and their security was really good, but it was a dangerous field to frolic in because they did lots of work for the military, and if you got into the wrong data, you might end up in jail. But not if you were invited in. How far have people gotten? Well, I hear Dr. Arthouse got to the 6th target and then got stuck. The Gendyne guys keep leaderboards of who got where in what order, but not for the 6th and 7th levels, because only a few people have done it, and if they published it, everyone would mob them to find out how, or so they say. James Arthouse was the star professor of U of W. He'd written a few books popularizing computer science among laymen, which had sold well enough to get him on talk shows whenever something about technology came up. Gabe thought he was a bit of an attention whore, but forgave him because he really had done some impressive work in distributed computing. If he was stuck on this project, it was definitely worth Gabe's time. Is there some kind of deadline? Gabe asked. Ah, I see I have intrigued you, O imperturbable one. Look, I'm already behind, man. Just tell me if there's a deadline. Gabe's voice was sharper than he meant it to be, and he could see that he'd hurt Donovan's fragile ego. He swallowed his contempt and forced a softer tone into his voice. Sorry, it's just I almost missed out on this whole thing, you know? Donovan thought he understood what Gabe meant, and said, by way of forgiveness, "There's no deadline. I guess when someone gets to Excalibur, they'll shut off the challenge. They won't leave their network open forever." Gabe again cultivated the soft, apologetic note in his words. "Thanks, Don. I appreciate you telling me this. I'm going to catch the bus, all right? See you tomorrow." With his head against the window and his earbuds in, Gabe regretted his moment of anger at Donovan, and let the bus's jostling softly bang his head against the glass. Donovan was a good person, a normal person, other than his occasional affected oddness. The very fact that he was willing to stay friends with someone like Gabe, who tossed out abuse without even meaning to, proved that he was a forgiving and generous guy. Or needy. But what was wrong with that? People did need each other, didn't they? Humans in isolation fall to pieces. That's why hospices ask volunteers to visit the dying, and why the worst punishment in modern prison is solitary confinement. Donovan is probably holding me together, Gabe thought, keeping me sane. He deserves better than I give him. He resolved to apologize again the next time they saw each other, and mean it. Gabe's house was a short walk from the bus stop, through a neighborhood of arched verdant tunnels formed from the boughs of old trees whose roots bucked the sidewalks into periodic jumps to thrill bicycling children. His home, like all the others, was set back from the road and draped in the dark reds and deep greens of Japanese maple and ornamental cedar trees. The red bricks that wound a path through the garden were framed by tumescent moss, which swelled up through the cracks like braille, replete with the moisture of the morning's drizzle. It was a beautiful exterior, but past the deep, shaded porch with its beckoning swing, the inside reminded Gabe what his home was really like. Every angle, of picture frames, of furniture, of papers on countertops, was slightly skewed. The mess was the chaotic expression of the collision of stereotypes that was his parents' marriage, a grim testimonial of sacrament gone wrong. Gabe's mother was born Elizabeth Rowland Taylor, the fourth of 7 Taylor babies from that area of America where the flatness of the earth births an obsession with boundaries in the heart of man, a desperation to delineate. Seen from above, the land is a patchwork of division, crops abut, drawing geometric battle lines that ebb and flow with the seasons. Here and there a stand of trees lingers like an afterthought of the wildness that once reigned, their naked trunks shivering like the last fan to leave a cancelled concert. Elizabeth, like lots of kids from the Midwest, bolted for the city as soon as she could. Growing up poor, she planned to marry rich. In L.A., she waited tables and worked out, learned to pole dance and tanned. She went about her marriage mission pragmatically, which Gabe might have admired if it hadn't seemed so damned medieval. At least in the days of yore there was an expectation of innocence from the bride-to-be. His mother had stayed a virgin because her mother had said that no Christian man would marry a whore, but draped herself deliberately in the heady musk of sexuality. The goal seemed to be to arouse the lust of the desired male, lead him along until his blood-starved brain was delirious with desire, and then make him marry before he could slake his thirst. It was a plot from Shakespeare, but without the poetry, just the rutting male in his fertile field waiting to be sown once the plot was bought. She had met the perfect prospect in Gabe's father, the illustrious software heir Robert Matherson, and married quickly, and he proudly referred to her as a trophy wife, apparently thinking it was an affirmation of her beauty. He'd wanted a woman like her since his adolescence, when he'd pinned previous versions of her blonde body on his red bedroom walls. He never really grew up. He was the sort of man who would raise his eyebrows approvingly as college girls half his age passed by, with his wife in the passenger seat, and shout back to his son, "The one on the left or the one on the right?" When Gabe looked at his mother in dismay, her studiously blank expression made no indication that anything was wrong, and his father would pat her thigh, laughing as though to say, "We're all joking here, isn't this great?" His sexual self was his avatar of domination. He insisted that Gabe's mother be loud so the neighbors can hear when they had sex, but Gabe was sure it was a display of manliness meant for him. Robert was teaching his son how a marriage should be, how a man should be. In college, he'd read some feminist literature in the bullshit composition courses he had to take. It gave him the language to express their relationship, but he'd hated it long before he understood its anachronistic place in history. It oozed illness like a plague victim, and the disarray of the house was a grim bubonic proof. Day-old beer cans littered the living room, dripping pale stain into the carpet. A half-eaten chicken dinner lay off-kilter atop couch cushions. Dishes soured in the sink, and an intrusion of cigarette roaches wallowed in their ashes, eager again to be lit. When Elizabeth got back from Pilates, she would start her daily cleaning, have the house vacuumed and Febrezed when Robert got home from happy hour, and meet him at the door with a smile, still in her Victoria's Secret sport ensemble. The house's daily oscillation between filthy and fresh was the arrhythmic heartbeat of their dying relationship. Gabe could see the end already, sketched in the sagging lines at the edges of Elizabeth's face and navel, where the skin ought to be taut. She was an aging show horse who could still prance and leap, but whose back was slowly sagging. Soon there would be more plastic surgery, in addition to her fake boobs, and then probably infidelity or divorce or both. The farce could only go on so long. To Gabe, this meant little. He'd taken to thinking of them as his genetic progenitors rather than as parents, which is why he called them by their names rather than their titles. He never gave them any trouble, but never reached out to them either because he detested them. They never reached out to him because they were utterly self-involved, and so he had grown up running parallel to their microcosmic drama, observing, evaluating, and rejecting them first as role models and then as objects of affection. Gabe reached his door and locked it behind him. He Googled the General Dynamics blog and found the list of target data. The first three were the names and addresses of 3 GenDyn employees at successively higher levels of security, and each with less specific information to define the target. They all worked on something called Javelin. The fourth target was a progress summary for this project. That doesn't make sense. The fourth target was a progress summary for Javelin. The fifth was a summary of another project, and the sixth was something called the Gatekeeper. Lastly, there was Excalibur. Gabe settled into his chair and flipped on his second monitor, while at the same time opening a system dialog box and running systemsim.exe. The program loaded, and he pointed it to the IP address given in the challenge. On the larger second monitor, what looked like a game world loaded. Gabe had made this program by combining the terrain generation algorithms of an old video game with a program designed to create beautiful visual representations of music, and altering them both so that they took as their inputs information about computer networks, file structures. He left the algorithms mostly to their own devices, and the results were usually interesting, although often extremely buggy, more the former than the latter this time. Before him, a huge gate in a wall that stretched to the horizon in 2 directions. Before him was a huge gate in a wall that stretched to the horizon in both directions. The gate, many times taller than Gabe's eye level, was composed of a grid of numbered doorways, almost all of which glowed red, with a few yellows and 1 green. This was how the game simulated firewalls, with each door a port into or out of the system. Gabe pointed his crosshair at the green port first, clicking his mouse to teleport forward. As he'd suspected, its number was 22, the port that systems used for secure shell protocol. Creating a pathway to this port from your computer was a fairly common way to gain access to a network. You could find tutorials online that a 10-year-old could follow. All around the doorway floated tiny flags, each with a unique crest. These were the signatures of hackers who had passed through the port and left a little bit of code just inside. By right-clicking the flags, Gabe could have brought up the actual code itself on the other monitor, but they usually had the cultural value of unartistic graffiti, proudly proclaiming that Hacker OG was here. Gabe ignored them. Instead, he used the 3 key to cast a spell in the game. He programmed the game's spells to control various programs on the second screen that helped him to navigate systems. The 1 key, for example, ran a Google search for a selected bit of text. The 3 key created a secure shell protocol tunnel from his computer to the port he was looking at. As his system completed the operation, the sky above blossomed into fitful color. The music visualization software Gabe had cannibalized now showed how much of his system's power was being used. It painted fluctuating rivers of vibration and movement in the sky, synchronized to the gigahertz heartbeat of Gabe's pulsing processor. Before passing through the tunnel, Gabe went to look at some of the other intrusion attempts, the yellow glowing doors. The first failed attempt was an HTML connection that had been refused. This kind of attack amounted basically to asking very nicely if the firewall would let you in, so it wasn't surprising that it had been shut down. But the other attempt was cleverer. The hacker had tried to disguise his access by piggybacking on innocent packets of information that are routinely sent back and forth between networks, called pings. It was surprising that this hacker hadn't gotten through, since the only ways to fend off this kind of attack were to inspect each packet deeply, scanning all of the information within it, or to stop the pings from coming in and out, which severely hamstrings the system. Puzzled, Gabe returned to the secure shell tunnel and walked through. On the other side of the wall, where Gabe's system could see the huge General Dynamics network, immense file structures began to blossom into the psychedelic. Immense file structures began to blossom above into the psychedelic sky, each rendered as a blue wireframe tree shooting up from the root directory and branching into immense fractals, each folder containing 10, 100, 1,000 others, which each held a legion more. The actual files inside the folders appeared as motes of glowing blue light the width of a pixel on the screen, so that the treetops exuded an unearthly diffuse light, like some shrouded city on the ocean's abyssal plain. Gabe could imagine bioluminescent predators prowling this luminous forest, swimming after intruding surface dwellers with a watery rush, and great gnashing of digital teeth. The thought gave him a shudder, which shook him from his transfixed stillness. He tapped another of his spells and typed the name of the first target. His character rose high above the treetops as below 100 branches slid up the spectrum from blue to orange. These were the files related to the target, and Gabe blinked toward the largest cluster. He found himself among the branches that sprang from the man's user account. He had his own tiny tree growing here from a massive bough, a mere leaflet set against the rest of the tree, but a head-high sapling from this distance. Gabe ran a search for contact, which got him what he needed. It was easy to see which file to open because it was covered with the lowbrow flags of digital graffiteurs. That gave Gabe an idea. Why should he go through the motions of finding each target himself when so many others had already done the work? It took a few minutes, but he created a Boolean search for all of the code signatures and ran it across the whole system, rising back up into the sky as he worked. He prioritized the results by density so that the places where everybody ended up glowed like stadium lights from his high vantage. He clicked his way through the next 4 targets in the space of 5 minutes, and found the 6th by running a more specific search on only those tags that appeared at the 5th target. The gatekeeper, the 6th target, was an executable file named gtkpr.exe, and was to be found in an innocuous folder in the highest reaches of the most vertiginous of the data trees, glowing humbly orange like a newly minted diva intimidated by bright lights. Only a handful of flags surrounded the file, which meant only a few people had made it this far. Gabe felt a little thrill of pride that he had gotten as far as Dr. Arthouse in just a few minutes. Gabe downloaded the executable and tried to submit it in the same way he had the others, by uploading the target file to the blog. But instead of adding his name to a leaderboard, the blog sent him to a page which said, "Run gtkpr.exe from your computer's root directory to generate a system key." This was very bad news. Everyone learns eventually that running suspicious programs from dubious sources is the quickest way to ruin a computer. Usually, they installed some sort of snooping software that served you with targeted ads or made your computer part of a zombie network, so that some Russian porn magnate could use your computer's connection to shut down websites with denial-of-service attacks. Gabe could hardly imagine that General Dynamics had any interest in either of those options, so the program must be designed to do something else. Could it be as simple as a test of naivete? It didn't seem likely that many naive people would get this far in a complex hacking challenge. Might it be some way for them to identify him, like a beacon set off in his system, telling them who and where he was? Perhaps it was just a binary bomb that would implode his computer, melt his processor, and fry his RAM like sizzling digital bacon. Gabe couldn't stop now. He needed that damn key, but there was no reason to be reckless. Gabe would take every precaution. In a few minutes, everything was ready. He'd run a program that created a virtual machine within his computer that was completely isolated from his real system. It would run the gatekeeper in a little pocket of subjectively normal computing reality, isolating it from his files and hopefully preventing it from doing any real damage. He copied gtkpr.exe into the root directory of the virtual machine, took a breath, and then launched it. For a moment, little happened. A black system dialog box opened and white commands scrolled up it faster than Gabe could follow. Then the box disappeared, and there was a lull in which Gabe realized he was leaning forward, body tensed, eyes searching, wondering if that was it. Then the game launched again, within the virtual machine, loading the world that represented his own system, tiny compared to the huge forest of the Gendine systems. Servers. Something was wrong, though. It had loaded a landscape based on the familiar size of Gabe's actual system. It should have been constrained by the bounds of the virtual box it was running in. The game world finished loading, and Gabe's character appeared. Something else was awry. The trees and sky looked wrong. They still followed the wireframe glowing lights motif, but the lines of the wireframe were closer together and there were more of them. They looked better, much better, as though someone had turned up the graphics settings, but that was impossible. The game was old. It shouldn't be able to look this good. Gabe reached for the keyboard, intending to take a closer look at the nearest data tree, but found that he had no control. His character was rooted to the spot, yet the game had not frozen. Slowly, and without his touching the mouse, his view turned skyward. The oscillations that showed his system's vital signs blared red and orange, shaking with a violence and syncopation that mocked their musical origins. The discordant lines struck out from focal blazes, each screaming its own color into the starless night. As he stared up, he perceived that they were moving across the sky as though the planet were spinning, and reminded himself in vain that there was no planet, as he fended off sudden vertigo. The sputtering, striving stars fell more rapidly towards the horizon, their colors blurring into schizophrenic static that superseded the senses. Then a flash of black exploded from the box that held the virtual machine and covered Gabe's entire monitor. Had it crashed him? No. Where the sunset had been before its violently entropic murder, a form was rising like a Tartarus-freed titan. Its hulking, stalking form mocked all notions of scale, and its brightness seized with the anger of an earth-eating supernova too long restrained. Again, Gabe reached for the keyboard instinctively, this time with an inclination to flee, but again found himself rooted in place. Nearing, the beast stooped to its knuckles like an ape, and then thrust its head down to within a foot of Gabe's face, its fury filling the entire screen. Spotted plasma seeped from the eyes of the mask like tears, but when its voice rang out, it was with the arrogance of a god. "You have been deemed worthy to challenge me!" The tone contradicted the words, and the taunt that followed would spat like a snot ball at beggars. "Come if you dare!" The screen went black, and Gabe could hear his computer's fan click off, confirming a crash. He could still see the monster's mask burned into his eyes as a blue-green afterimage. In block letters across its forehead, unmistakable even in its visual sun shadow, was a single word: Excalibur. That's it. Whew. Man, this really knackers the voice. So anyways, first chapter, second chapter, I don't know. There is a reason to include chapter 1 as chapter 1 rather than reversing its placement with this chapter. But maybe this one is sufficiently more awesome to make that imperative. Let me know what you think. And also, don't forget that you won't ever probably see my videos again if you don't subscribe. So if you liked this one, subscribe. I promise I won't spam your channel.